Audio is rolling. Camera is rolling. All right, Tim. Action.
Hello, my name's Tim Malone and I'm a retired American history teacher. I taught history at Elgin Community College for 25 years. And today, I've been taping my lectures over the last couple of years. They're on a YouTube channel called Tim Malone History Lectures. Check it out. Today I want to talk about fascism again. I did a fascism lecture on my YouTube channel last year or the year before, and it was an actual lecture. I taped my lecture on fascism in 2024 at the Mays Bookstore in downtown Rockford, Illinois. Check it out. And if you're ever in Rockford, stop by the Mays Bookstore. It's a great place. Dave's a great guy. But I wanted to revisit the topic of fascism because it's much in the news. With Donald Trump as president and with his MAGA movement, Make America Great Again. Trumpism. I'm an ism guy, so I kind of like the idea of Trumpism, the ideology of Donald Trump, the ideology of his movement, because he represents a movement, one that got him elected president twice. And what I want to say is, I studied journalism once in my life. I was a half-assed journalist once in my life. And in journalism, there's a thing called the lead. The lead. What's the most important news story of the day? I watch the news, the network news, still to this day. I flip between ABC, NBC, and CBS pretty much every night to see, first and foremost, what's the lead? What are these journalists, and I put it in quotation marks because boy, oh boy, mainstream corporate media, journalism, is not much what I consider journalism anymore. What's the lead? Well, historians operate on some very similar principle. Historians ask the same question. What's the lead? What's the most important event in this time period in history? What's important? What's the most important events in history? Historians a lot of times seem reticent to admit it, but historians make judgments about the importance of events all the time. The importance of events. What are the most important events in American history? What are the most important events in American history? What are the leads? Now, traditionally, I've been in the category, and not alone, a lot of American historians. The Revolution, of course, the Civil War, and World War II. Those are the most important events in American history. And let me pause here and say, I think that the ascent of Donald Trump and Trumpism, and we're in the midst of this right now, is the fourth. I was born in 1951. World War II was over. So Trumpism, the ascent of Donald Trump and his movement, is the most important event in American history in my lifetime. And I'm old. I've come to this conclusion. Now let me pause here and talk about history for a minute. I've operated in my historical career on the 20-year rule. 20-year rule. I picked it up from a professor I had at Northern Illinois University in grad school, Jordan Schwartz. May he rest in peace. Jordan's been dead a long time now. But he operated and announced in his seminars, his classes, that he operated on the 20-year rule. If it's not 20 years old, it's not history. It's got to be 20 years old. So in other words, if Jordan Schwartz or me wrote a textbook, I'd stop in 2006. 2026 now, 20-year rule, 2006, that's history. Anything on is current events, not history. Now, you might say, what? And I understand that's arbitrary. It's useful, though, when you're teaching a class to say we're only going to go to 20 years ago, because most of you who've had history classes understand history classes never get to the present anyway. So you just declare it at the outset, the 20-year rule. So Trump and Trumpism fall too recent, too current to be history according to the 20-year rule. However, with this lecture, I'm making an exception. I'm going to break the 20-year rule because I've come to believe that the ascent of Donald Trump, his election twice, his movement, are so damn important in American history. They're the lead. They're one of the most important events. They rank up there with the Revolution, the Civil War, and World War II in terms of being important, groundbreaking events in American history. And authoritarianism and anti-constitutionalism, in my opinion, but not just me, millions of Americans, of unprecedented scale. Our democratic republic, to the degree that it was a democratic republic to begin with, because leftists like me have criticized many things in America over its entire history. But this is something different. Trumpism is something more dire, something more epoch-making. So I'm breaking the rules. I'm going to talk about Trump and Trumpism. Trumpism caught me unawares, historically flat-footed. Now, I think I've mentioned before in my lecture on fascism earlier in the list of my lectures that I thought I was special in that in the second half of American history class at ECC, we split America into two halves, History 101 and History 102. And in the second half, Reconstruction to the present, usually, but of course 20 years for me, I taught a section when we got to the 1930s, the Depression in the 30s. I taught a section on fascism in American history, because fascism is usually thought of in detail in European history, Italy, Germany, Mussolini, Hitler. Fascism, what we might call classical fascism, European intra-war fascism. I did an entire class, an entire section on fascism, because I agreed with a historian, Robert O. Paxson, insight that fascism always lurks in the shadows of liberal democracies. Always. Fascism is always there in liberal democracies. And that's what the United States was. That's what the United States is, despite the Vietnams and the segregation and Jim Crow and lynching and all the sins you can pile in. It was still a liberal democracy. Until now, Paxson's insight that fascism lurked in the shadows of liberal democracies always. And yet, despite that insight, and that I tried to introduce to my students, beware, beware. Trumpism caught me by surprise. Caught me unawares. Me. What the hell happened? Fascism. What a muddle fascism is. And the reaction to Trumpism and the struggle over whether the F word, fascism, applies. Is Trump and his movement, are they fascists? Is it proper to call them fascists? Are they Nazis? Are they akin to Hitler and his movement in Germany? Because, of course, when we talk about fascism, and when I taught my unit on fascism in my classes at Elgin Community College, one of the tricks I used, it wasn't a trick, but was to introduce the personage of Adolf Hitler. Now again, I've mentioned before, I have 30 different textbooks of American history at home. When I taught, they used to send them to me free to solicit my use of them in my classes. And by and large, and I did some research on this, and I'll get to that in a minute. By and large, American history textbooks don't spend much time on Hitler. And yet, my observation as a teacher was that in my classes, Hitler was the most universally recognized figure in all of human history. Let me say that again. More of my students knew Hitler than knew Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. Yeah, I'm not kidding. In my opinion, he's the most universally recognized human being of all time, Adolf Hitler. So I could use that peg. In other words, I talked about fascism, you got to talk about Hitler, and the students would perk up. I'd get them. I'd hook them with Hitler. Hitler was a fascist. Perhaps the first thing to note about the word fascist is that it's highly contentious. No duh. Usually used as an insult and a definitional muddle. Both Democrats and Republicans, both liberals and conservatives, both Trumpers and anti-Trumpers use the term to describe each other. It's an epithet. It's an insult. A few years after World War II was over, George Orwell, the famous English author and political commentator, wrote that the word fascism has now no meaning except so far as it signifies something not desirable. And he wanted it dropped. And you still hear that from people today. It's so muddled. It's so historically contentious. It's such a slur that it's not useful as a historical term of analysis. Now, I disagree with that. I mean, obviously, historically, fascism, the word and political concept are unavoidable and have to be grappled with historically. Can't just be, well, we're not going to use that term because it's too muddled, too contentious, too much of an epitaph. I don't know what to say. Again, fascism flummoxes me too. There are those historians who say that it's only useful to describe Mussolini in Italy, 1922 to 1945, or Hitler in Germany, 1933 to 1945. Only limited to those people. And I disagree with that too. I think there's been fascists, but it's contentious. And so we get typology. There's different types of fascism. I think if you talk about fascism, you got to talk about certain aspects. And fascism is racist. Hardcore fascism. Although, again, that's hard to say because a lot of scholars say Mussolini, who was in power in Italy 12 years before Hitler came to power in Germany, or 11 years, that Mussolini wasn't a hardcore racist regime. That Italian fascism became more racist as it fell under the spell, under the control of German fascism. That German fascism was your hardcore racist fascism. You can have non-racist fascism. Again, you get this idea that fascism is very slippery, a slippery concept. What is pure essence of fascism if it's not racism? Now, usually they say fascism is ultra-nationalistic. The nation state is the essence of fascism. Ultra-nationalism. So therefore, fascism is a modern phenomenon. Modern, industrial, developmental. Don't look to the Middle Ages for fascism. Don't look to ancient Egypt for fascism, the Roman Empire. None of that. There's all authoritarian, brutal, repressive regimes. But they're not fascist. Fascist takes modernism. It has to be a modern society. A modern industrial society can be fascist. So today, if you go to Africa or on and off in Central and South America, you get these strong men, you get these these generals. They're not fascist, they're authoritarian. They may even border on totalitarianism, but they're not fascist because they're not modern. Mussolini, he wrote a book called Fascism. He coined the term, Mussolini, fascism. He said, Mussolini in his book, don't go looking for historical antecedents. Fascism is new, it's something new. I founded it, post-World War I. In European nations, developed countries. Fascism is modern. A modern mass movement based upon mass media. Ultranationalism, but then again, ultranationalism, that appears in most definitions, but the most nationalistic, the most isolated country in the world is North Korea. That's a communist regime. But fascists, Hitler and Mussolini, and then the Japanese, formed an alliance. Ultranationalism, you'd say, well, no alliances. No, fascist regimes enter into alliances, enter into leagues with other fascist states, back other fascist movements, like Mussolini and Hitler backed Franco in the Spanish Civil War in the late 1930s. Plus, fascism means war. Fascism means militaristic expansion. Is that ultranationalistic to invade your neighbors? Well, I guess, but that's also foreign policy. That's also foreign engagement. Ultranationalism. Now, of course, most people think of Trump or Trumpism as nationalistic. Tariffs, trade walls, tit-for-tat foreign relations, get out of NATO, get out of the World Trade Organization, WTO. One-on-one, not leagues of nations, but that's not, you can see I get pretty frustrated when I talk about fascism because it's here and then it's there and then it's here again. Now, some historians say that fascism is paleogenic, which means an effort to restore past glory. Fascism harkens back to a golden age, which doesn't, in most, Hitler, Mussolini, Trump, all of them, no golden age, a mythological golden age. They harken back to a golden age that never existed. Make America great again. MAGA, make America great again. There it is. The past. A better America back then. Make America great again. That's fascistic. But I think that doesn't make you a hardcore fascist. It's contradictory. Fascism's contradictory. And I don't know. Trumpism, in my opinion, is racist. Harkens back to make America great again, make America racist again, or more racist when it was back then. Okay, I'm gonna talk some here about Roger Griffin, who wrote a book gave an interview about a book, The Nature of Fascism, in 1991. Griffin published a book, The Nature of Fascism. It included a definition of fascism as, quote, a genus of political ideology whose mythic core in its various permutations is paleogenic. That means hearkening back to a golden age. Form of populist ultranationalism. Again, he uses the term ultranationalistic. Griffin situated ideology and the myth of a national rebirth, or paleogenesis, as the center of his understanding of fascism. Paleogenesis, genesis, national rebirth. Things were better in a mythic past, and we're going to bring back that mythic past. Make America great again. Griffin has noted the problem that there seems to be no working definition of what actually fascism is. No kidding. Scholars define fascism more based on what it opposed rather than what it stood for. Fascism was an attempt to create a distinct form of modernity. That's what Mussolini said. Fascism was an effort to create a distinct form of modernity. Here's some of the things that Griffin said in this interview. Some major historians have been so exasperated by the lack of agreement about what fascism means that they have called for it to be banned altogether outside of Mussolini's Italy and Hitler's Germany. But that is naive because a number of interwar and contemporary ultranationalist movements called themselves fascist. So you're a fascist if you call yourself a fascist? And again, I'd like to know what Griffin means by ultranationalist. Is Trumpism ultranationalist? Ultranationalist. There's a journal, Fascism, Journal of Comparative Fascist Studies, founded in 2012. I haven't checked that journal out. Fascism, Journal of Comparative Fascist Studies. Founded in 2012. It deals with fascism in all its dimensions and variations and is published twice a year. Published by the International Association of Comparative Fascist Studies. Again, Griffin, fascism is best seen as a revolutionary form of ultranationalism. Revolutionary form. Fascism is revolutionary. Now again, I don't know exactly what Griffin means by that. Is Trumpism revolutionary? No. Perhaps? Maybe? A general template of fascism, according to Griffin. 1. A war on perceived national weakness and decadence. Oh, fashions, they're manly men. Weakness is the worst thing. Decadence. The old days. Give me those old values. Uniformed paramilitarism. The black shirts in Italy and the brown shirts in Germany. Now, Trumpism, uniformed paramilitarism. Paramilitarism. That means not the regular army, not the regular police, but vigilante groups in the streets, uniformed. Mocking military discipline and military order, but they're rioters, they're paramilitaries. The belief in a single party and charismatic leader. Single party state. One of the first things Hitler did when he came to power and seized power was to outlaw all other political parties. He outlawed all of the political parties. If you belonged to a political party, they were dissolved by law. You were sent to the camps. You were arrested and beaten up if you couldn't form a political party. Now, Trump says terrible things about Democrats, but he hasn't come close to outlawing the Democratic Party, has he? Rounding up Democrats and sending them to the camps? You have to do that to be true fascist? An emphasis on national homogeneity and an end of cultural pluralism. End of pluralism. End of cultural pluralism. National homogeneity. Cultural homogeneity. And number 5, the pursuit of a nebulous national rebirth, paleogenesis. Palingenesis. Or ESIS. Paleogenesis. National rebirth. Now that Trumpism is there, isn't it? National rebirth, make America great again. That's fascistic. But does it denote that his movement is real, capital F, fascism? I feel like I'm might be confusing my listeners more than enlightening them. Here Griffin says, while all interwar fascisms, mainly Italy and Germany, were tendentially racist because of the intensity of their ultranationalism, not all were biologically or eugenically racist. So you can have non-racist fascism. Fascism rejects liberal democracy, individualism, pluralism, humanism, and rationalism. Whoa. Again, this gets into what is fascism not. It's not democratic, it's not individualistic, it's not pluralistic, it's not humanistic, and it's not rational. Trumpism. Not rational. Like windmills drive you crazy. I mean, Trump actually believes that if you have an electric car and you're driving down the road and there's a windmill and the wind stops, the windmill slows down, your car stops. And he gets away with saying that over and over again. Doesn't understand how an electric grid works at all. What was needed for fascism to arise was a liberal state undergoing a structural crisis accompanied by a widespread subjective crisis of identity. A widespread subjective crisis of identity. A nationwide subjective crisis of identity. Now, did we have that in the coming up to Trumpism? We had a subjective crisis of national identity, meaning and belonging. A crisis of meaning and belonging. Wow, that's pretty heavy, and I kind of befuddles me. Did we? Any more than any other time in my life? Fascism regains its usefulness if it is used for ultranationalistic projects that are genuinely revolutionary and driven by paleogenic myths of renewal and regeneration. Genuinely revolutionary. Again, I'd have to delve into this and try to figure out what Griffin means by truly revolutionary. Is Trumpism truly revolutionary? And what does that mean? Well, we had the American Revolution and the French Revolution and the Russian Revolution. Is Trump and Trumpism in that category of revolutionary change? Griffin says, nowadays there is far too much sloppy thinking and Semitic slippage between the right, the radical and extreme right, racism, hardline conservatism, populism, religious fundamentalism, and radical right-wing populism, to the point that such terms confuse more than they illuminate. Yeah. The misuse and abuse of the concept of fascism is even more pronounced in pulp journalism and the blogosphere, where illiberal leaders, as far apart as Putin, Erdogan, Trump, Orban, Bolsonaro, Kim Jong-un, can be found routinely called fascists. Democratic right-wing populism. It's compatible with democratic processes, but seeks to renationalize society. Renationalize. Democratic right-wing populism. Only when radical right-wing populist resentments are translated into revolutionary aspirations to bring about a new national order is it legitimate or helpful to call the movement fascist. Only when radical right-wing populist resentments are translated into revolutionary aspirations to bring about a new national order is it legitimate to call the movement fascist. Again, the revolutionary word. Griffin seems to think that fascism, for a movement to be called fascism, has to be revolutionary. Fundamental reordering, I guess. Here, none of the leaders of current illiberal democracies, including Trump, illiberal democracies, are actually fascists. And referring to Trump or Putin as fascists is to fail to appreciate the danger posed by radical right-wing populism, which would lead to a deeply illiberal apartheid state, which the U.S. was before the civil rights movement, and which South Africa was until the release of Mandela from prison. Illiberal democracy imposed by authoritarian nationalists is arguably a greater threat to democracy than fascism. Illiberal democracy. Holy moly. It's time for liberals to realize that they face an existential threat to the progress of humanistic values and are reluctantly engaged in a global battle for hegemony. Griffin, liberal democracy versus illiberal democracy. He calls it para-fascism. Wow. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. So Trump's not a fascist because his movement isn't revolutionary. And there's still democratic aspects to it. And what? We're going to find that out. I'm talking here in May of 2026. The midterm elections are in November 2026. And it looks like the Democrats are going to win the election. The out party always wins, almost always wins off year elections. And Trump's not going to be able to either pause or overthrow that election. Just like Orban in Hungary a month ago or so, he'd been in power for 16 years, manipulating the media and subverting opposing parties and corruption and cronyism, and he got whooped a month ago in elections. They still hold elections. Illiberal democracies still hold elections. They try to manipulate them, to steal them, but they hold them. Even Putin holds elections. Illiberal democracy, not fascism, or what Griffin calls para-fascism. 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 Authoritarian conservative movements rooted in nationalist movements and regimes that adapt characteristics associated with fascism, such as personality cults and paramilitary organizations, while diverting from conventional fascism tenets such as paragenetics, national rebirth, ultranationalism, and modernism and populism. Parafascism. Parafascism often emerges in response to the need for a facade of popular support in an age of mass politics without a genuine commitment to revolutionary nationalism. Instead, focusing on maintaining tradition, religion, and culture. Maintaining old traditions, parafascism. Parafascist regimes may co-opt or neutralize genuinely fascist movements. Parafascism. That's what Trumpism is. It's not a revolutionary movement. It's an effort to bring back the old days, but not revolutionarily, I guess. Parafascism. Trump's a parafascist. And, I want to... One of the things that fascism has, and that parafascism has, or Trumpism, is cult of the leader. Cult of the leader. And this gets into the realm of mass psychology. How is it that millions of people, tens of millions of people, come to believe the same outlandish, irrational, illogical, stupid things about their leader? And you can see a lot of the artwork done by Trumpists about Trump. Well, there was the one where he was robed like Jesus with a halo around his head, and he had his hands on someone to heal them. Trump as Jesus. Trump as muscle man. I mean, this is typical cult of the leader stuff. And I can get pretty depressed thinking about cult of the leader stuff because it's so irrational to me. And yet there's millions of Americans who believe that Trump is a superhero, that Trump has magical powers, that he's infallible. What a funny species we are as humans. When educated people can give up their rationality and throw their lives to, Trump's a salesman, Trump's a real estate man, Trump's a liar. It's unbelievable. And you can get so depressed thinking about your country, my country, the United States. I love my country. I'm a patriot. But what happened? Now, we've had presidents, who were put up on a pedestal before, but nothing like this. That's why when I started this lecture about how bad things are and how I broke the 20-year rule to talk about Trump and Trumpism, while we're still in the throes of it, we don't have any real historical perspective on Trump and Trumpism yet. It's still playing out, and it could go terribly wrong. It could go capital F fascist. Could it? Very interesting times we live in. Trump's a parafascist.